If this is your first time with us, we're really happy you're here. And if you've been listening for a while, thank you for coming back and spending part of your day with us.
Yes, seriously, thank you. I always like to imagine people listening while they're commuting, cooking, or maybe just sitting quietly with a cup of tea. And it means a lot that you choose to practice English with us.
It really does. And today's topic is one of those topics that might not sound exciting at first, but once you start talking about it, you realize how much it's actually part of your life.
I already have a feeling I know where this is going because my reaction to this topic is usually a deep sigh.
Same here. Today, we're talking about bills, monthly expenses, payments, all the things that quietly control your life once you become an adult.
Quietly and sometimes not so quietly. Sometimes they show up and you're like, wait, why is this number so high?
Exactly. And that moment, that little shock when you open a bill or check your phone, that's something almost everyone can relate to, no matter where you live.
That's why this is such a useful topic for English learners. This isn't textbook English. This is real-life English, the kind you need when you're talking to friends, roommates, customer service, or even just explaining your situation to someone else.
And also the kind of English you need when you're frustrated, confused, or trying to stay calm while dealing with money, which is not always easy.
Money conversations already feel uncomfortable in your own language. Doing them in English can feel even harder.
Exactly. So today, we're going to help you feel more confident talking about bills, payments, and monthly expenses in English, in a natural way, the way people actually talk.
And we're not just going to explain words and move on. We're going to talk about real situations, real problems, and the little emotional moments that come with them.
Before we get into all of that, though, we have a small favor to ask.
Yes, if you're enjoying Speak English Daily and you want to keep improving your English through real conversations like this, please take a second to subscribe to the channel.
And if you find this episode helpful, give it a like. It really helps more learners find us, and it tells us that this kind of content is useful for you.
And if you know someone who is learning English, maybe a friend, a family member, or even a coworker, sharing the episode can really help them too.
Learning English feels much easier when you don't feel like you're doing it alone.
Absolutely. Now, Anna, let's talk about why bills are such an interesting topic, even though people usually don't think of them that way.
I think it's because bills touch so many parts of life. Where you live, how you live, what you prioritize, and sometimes even how stressed you feel.
That's true. When someone says, I'm stressed this month, very often it's connected to money or bills in some way.
And when learners can talk about those things in English, it opens the door to more honest, more natural conversations.
Also, bills come with their own vocabulary, words and phrases that you hear all the time, but maybe you're not fully comfortable using yet.
Words that are simple, but very specific. And once you learn them, you start noticing them everywhere.
And today, we're going to slow things down and really sit with those words, not just list them, but use them in context.
We'll talk about our own experiences, some good ones, some frustrating ones, and probably a few moments where we look back and think, yeah, that was not my best moment.
I already know I'm going to admit to at least one mistake.
Same. And that's part of learning, both with money and with language.
So if you've ever felt confused by a bill, annoyed by a payment, or stressed about a monthly expense, you're definitely not alone.
And by the end of this episode, our goal is that you feel more comfortable talking about all of it in English, even when the topic feels a little uncomfortable.
All right, let's take a breath, settle in, and start gently building the language you need for this part of everyday life.
Let's do it.
All right, before we get lost in stories and complaints about our own bills, let's slow things down for a moment and give everyone the language they actually need. Because without the right words, these conversations can feel really frustrating.
Yes, and I want to say this clearly. You don't need difficult or fancy English to talk about bills, but you do need the right words, the ones people use again and again.
And once you learn them, you start hearing them everywhere. on emails, on apps, on paper bills, even in short text messages from companies.
Let's start with a phrase that causes a lot of stress for people: the due date.
Oh yes, the due date is a powerful little phrase. The due date is the day when your bill must be paid. Not should be paid, must be paid.
And that's an important feeling to understand. When someone says the due date is the 10th, it means the company expects the money by that day, not later.
Right. For example, you might say, my phone bill is due on the 10th, so I need to pay it before the weekend.
And emotionally, the due date is often the thing people worry about, because life gets busy and suddenly you realize, wait, today's the 9th.
That moment when you check the calendar and your stomach drops a little.
We've all had that moment. Now, another phrase that comes up all the time is utility bills.
Utility bills are the bills for basic services you use in your home. These are not optional things.
We're talking about electricity, water, gas, sometimes heating, and in many places, trash collection.
You can say something like, my utility bills are higher in the winter because I use more heating.
Or in the summer, if you use air conditioning a lot, your electricity bill can jump, and suddenly you're paying much more than usual.
And this is where people often compare notes with friends, saying things like, is your electricity bill this high too, or is something wrong with mine?
Which leads us nicely to another word that people really don't like seeing: overdue.
Overdue means you didn't pay it by the due date, the deadline passed, and the company noticed.
And overdue has a very negative feeling. It's not neutral. When you see that word, you feel a bit nervous.
You might get an email that says, your payment is overdue, please pay immediately.
And that message usually comes with stress, guilt, or panic, especially if you genuinely forgot.
And very often overdue leads to another phrase, late fee.
A late fee is extra money you have to pay because your bill was overdue.
It's basically the company saying, because you paid late, this is going to cost you more.
For example, you might say, I forgot to pay my credit card bill and now I have a late fee of $20.
And that hurts because you didn't get anything extra. You just paid more for the same bill.
That's why people talk so much about paying on time. It's not about being perfect. It's about avoiding unnecessary stress and extra costs.
Now let's move to a phrase that feels lighter and more social. Split the bill.
This one usually comes up when you're with other people, friends, roommates, coworkers.
When you split the bill, you divide the total cost between two or more people.
You could say, let's split the bill evenly, or let's split the bill based on what we ordered.
And this phrase is not only for restaurants. It can be for shared internet, shared electricity, or even shared subscriptions.
Which brings us to another very useful phrase, billing cycle.
Billing cycle is the regular period of time between bills. For most services, it's monthly.
So you might say, my billing cycle starts on the 1st of the month and ends on the last day.
Or, my phone company's billing cycle runs from the 15th to the 14th of the next month, which can be confusing at first.
And this matters because your usage and your payment are connected to that cycle.
Now, I want to pause for a second and say something important to our listeners.
Yes, this is important.
You don't need to memorize long definitions. What really helps is hearing these words again and again in real conversations.
That's why we're going to keep using these phrases naturally as we talk, so your brain gets comfortable with them.
And if you don't understand everything the first time, that's completely normal.
Learning happens through repetition and emotion, not pressure.
So for now, just notice the words due date, utility bills, overdue, late fee, split the bill, billing cycle.
These are the building blocks, and in the next part, we're going to start using them in real stories with real feelings attached.
The kind of stories where you hear something and think, wait, that happened to me too.
And that's when the language really sticks.
So now that we've talked about the language, let's move into real life a little more, because this is where these words stop being vocabulary and start being part of everyday conversations.
And this is also where emotions show up. Because when you talk about your own bills, you're not just talking about numbers. You're talking about choices, habits, and sometimes small frustrations that build up over time.
I want to start by asking you something, Anna. When you think about your monthly bills, which one makes you sigh the most?
Oh, that's an easy question for me, and I don't even have to think about it. My internet bill.
I had a feeling you were going to say that. What is it about your internet bill that bothers you so much?
It's the feeling that it keeps changing, and not in a good way. Every time I think, okay, this is the amount now, I'll get used to it, something happens and it goes up again.
That feeling of, wait, wasn't this cheaper last year?
Yes, exactly that feeling. And I remember very clearly when I first signed up, because the price sounded reasonable at the time.
Let me guess, there was a special offer involved.
There was. They gave me a promotional rate for the first year, and at the beginning, I felt pretty happy about it.
And then the promotion ended.
It ended very quietly. No big warning, no phone call, just a new bill with a higher number.
That moment when you open the bill and just stare at it for a second.
I literally looked at it and thought, am I imagining this, or did this really go up by that much?
How much did it increase?
It went from around $60 a month to almost $80, and that might not sound huge to some people, but when you add it to all the other bills, you feel it.
Especially because it's a monthly bill. It's not a one-time thing.
Exactly. It becomes part of your regular expenses, and suddenly your budget feels tighter.
Did you check the due date right away, or were you still in shock?
I checked the due date right away, because even though I was annoyed, I didn't want the bill to become overdue.
That's such a real reaction. You're upset, but you're also thinking, I don't want a late fee on top of this.
Yes, because paying more by accident feels even worse than paying more because the price increased.
Have you thought about calling the company and asking about it?
I have, many times. I even tell myself, okay, tomorrow I'll call. But then tomorrow comes and I'm busy, and I put it off again.
Calling customer service can feel like such a big emotional task.
It really does. You know you might be on hold, you might have to explain everything, and you don't know if it will actually change anything.
I completely get that. For me, the bill that really gets under my skin is my electricity bill, especially during certain months.
Let me guess, summer?
Summer, without a doubt. Where I live, the heat is intense, and the air conditioning feels less like a luxury and more like survival.
That's one of those situations where you know why the bill is high, but it still hurts to see the number.
Exactly. In the cooler months, my electricity bill is pretty normal, but in the middle of summer, it can double.
Do you remember the first time that happened?
Yes, very clearly. I opened the bill and thought there must be a mistake because it was so much higher than my usual amount.
Did you check the billing cycle to see if it covered more days than normal?
I did. I checked everything. The billing cycle was normal, the due date was normal, and slowly I had to accept that this was just my usage.
That acceptance moment is hard.
It is, because then you start thinking about your habits, how often you run the air conditioning, what temperature you set it to, whether you could change anything.
Did you try to make changes?
I did. I raised the temperature a little, and I started turning it off when I left the apartment, even if it was for a short time.
And did it help?
It helped, but not in a dramatic way. The bill was still high, but it was slightly lower than before.
Sometimes that's the reality. You do your best, but some costs are just part of your environment.
And that's an important thing for learners to hear. Not every bill problem has a perfect solution.
Sometimes the solution is understanding the bill, accepting it, and planning around it.
And talking about it, too. When you say these things out loud, you realize you're not the only one dealing with them.
That's why conversations like this matter. They normalize the experience and give you the language to express it.
And now that we've shared our own stories, we're going to keep going deeper into the topic because there are more situations where bills really test your patience.
Especially when things don't go as planned. You know, one thing we haven't really talked about yet is what happens when bills stop being just annoying and start becoming a real problem, especially when you forget something or when life gets busy and your attention is somewhere else.
That moment when you realize you missed something important.
Yes, that moment. I remember when I first started living on my own, I was so proud of myself, paying rent, buying groceries, feeling very adult. And then one day I checked my email and saw a message that made my heart sink.
Let me guess, something about a payment.
Something about a payment, yes. It said my phone bill was overdue, and I honestly didn't understand how that happened at first.
That feeling of confusion mixed with panic.
Completely. I went back through my messages, my calendar, everything, and then it hit me. I had read the bill, thought I'd pay it later, and then just forgot.
That's such a common story. People don't forget because they don't care. They forget because life is full.
And the worst part was the late fee. It wasn't huge, but it felt unnecessary and annoying.
It always feels personal, even though it's just a system.
I remember thinking, I didn't get anything extra. Why am I paying more now?
After that happened, did you change how you manage your bills?
I did. I became a lot more intentional. Now, when I see a bill, I either pay it immediately or I write the due date somewhere very visible.
That's such an important habit. When I was younger, I relied too much on memory, and memory is not reliable.
Not at all, especially when every bill has a different due date.
For a long time, I struggled with that. One bill was due at the beginning of the month, another in the middle, another near the end, and my brain just couldn't keep track.
Did you ever miss one because of that?
More than once. The first time it happened, it was my credit card bill, and the late fee was painful.
Those late fees feel heavier somehow.
They do, because you already feel guilty, and then the number makes it worse. That's when I decided I needed a system.
What kind of system?
I started using automatic payments for some bills, the ones that stay around the same amount each month.
That can be really helpful, as long as you still check the bill.
That's the key part. Automatic payment doesn't mean ignoring it. I still look at the bill to make sure everything looks normal.
Because mistakes do happen.
They really do. And speaking of mistakes, I had a situation once that taught me to never assume a bill is always correct.
Oh, this sounds like a story.
It is. One month, I received a gas bill that was much higher than usual. At first, I thought maybe it was colder this month. Maybe I used more heating.
That's a very reasonable first thought.
But then I looked at the number again and something didn't feel right. It was more than triple what I usually pay.
That's when your intuition starts talking.
Yes, and instead of just paying it and moving on, I decided to call the company.
Which is not an easy decision emotionally.
Not at all. I had to wait on hold, explain my situation, and repeat myself more than once.
That alone takes patience.
It does. At first, the representative told me the bill was correct based on the meter reading.
And how did that make you feel?
Frustrated, honestly. I live alone, my habits hadn't changed, and I knew something was off.
Did you push back?
I did, politely. I explained my normal usage, and I asked if they could check the meter.
And?
It turned out the meter had been misread. The bill was wrong.
That feeling when you realize you weren't imagining it.
Relief, but also a little anger, because if I hadn't called, I would have paid a bill that wasn't mine.
That's such an important lesson for listeners. Checking your bills is part of paying your bills.
And speaking up matters. You're allowed to ask questions.
Absolutely. Now, let's talk about how we actually pay our bills, because that's changed a lot over the years.
It really has. Most of my bills are paid online now through my bank.
Same here. I log in, check the amounts, and pay everything in a few minutes, usually while sitting on my couch.
There's something very modern about paying serious adult bills while wearing comfortable clothes.
It takes some of the stress away, but I still have one bill I pay in a more traditional way.
Really? Which one?
My rent. My landlord prefers checks, and he likes receiving them in person.
That feels very old school, but also kind of personal.
It is, and sometimes that face-to-face moment is helpful, especially if there's something you need to talk about.
That's true. Paying bills isn't always just a transaction. Sometimes it's part of a relationship.
Whether it's with a company, a landlord, or even yourself and your own habits.
And all of these situations give you chances to use English in real, meaningful ways.
Which is why we're taking our time with this topic.
There's one part of talking about bills that always feels a little uncomfortable, and that's when other people are involved. because money is already a sensitive topic, and adding relationships to it makes everything more complicated.
Yes, as soon as bills become shared, emotions get stronger. It's no longer just about you and a company, it's about fairness, communication, and sometimes patience.
I think the most common situation for this is splitting the bill, especially when you're out with friends.
Oh yes, that moment at the end of a meal when the check arrives and everyone suddenly becomes very quiet.
You can almost feel the tension at the table.
Especially if people ordered very different things. Someone had a salad, someone had a steak, someone had dessert, and then someone casually says, "Should we just split it?"
And inside, you're thinking, wait, is that really fair?
Exactly. I remember one time I went out with a group of friends and I ordered something simple because I wasn't very hungry.
Let me guess, the bill was not simple.
Not at all. A couple of people ordered expensive drinks and appetizers, and when the bill came, someone suggested splitting it evenly.
That's such an awkward moment because you don't want to seem difficult.
Right. You don't want to ruin the mood, but you also don't want to pay for things you didn't order.
So what did you do?
I took a breath and said, very calmly, "Do you mind if I just pay for what I had? I didn't order much tonight."
That's a great way to phrase it. It's honest and respectful.
It still felt uncomfortable, but everyone understood, and in the end, it was fine.
Those moments are great examples of how language matters. The words you choose can make a difficult situation easier.
And this doesn't only happen at restaurants. It happens with shared apartments, too.
Roommates and bills is a whole world on its own.
It really is. I lived with roommates for several years, and we shared utility bills.
How did you handle that?
At first, we split everything equally. Electricity, water, internet. It seemed fair and simple.
Did it stay simple?
For a while, yes. But then one roommate started using a lot more electricity than the rest of us.
Let me guess. Space heaters, gaming computers, something like that?
A gaming setup, actually. Multiple screens running all night.
And the electricity bill noticed.
It definitely noticed. The bill went up, and suddenly we were all paying more.
That's where resentment can start.
Exactly. At first, no one said anything, but you could feel the tension growing.
Those unspoken feelings can make a living situation uncomfortable.
Eventually, we had a conversation. It wasn't easy, but we explained how the increased usage was affecting everyone.
And how did your roommate react?
At first, a little defensive, but once we explained it calmly, he understood. He agreed to cover part of the extra cost.
That's actually a really healthy outcome.
It was, but it required honesty and clear communication.
I had a different roommate situation when I was younger. One person's name was on the bills, and the rest of us paid our share to them.
That can be risky.
It was. One roommate was always late with his portion, and the person whose name was on the bill had to cover it temporarily.
That puts a lot of pressure on one person.
It does. Eventually, we solved it by setting up a shared account just for bills.
Everyone put their share in at the beginning of the month.
Exactly. Then the bills were paid from that account, and no one had to chase anyone.
That's such a good solution.
It taught me that systems matter, especially when money and relationships mix.
And for our listeners, these are great examples of how to talk about shared expenses in English, using calm, clear language.
Language that helps you protect both your money and your relationships.
Because at the end of the day, good communication saves more than just money.
Before we say goodbye, I want to talk about something that people always ask about when it comes to bills, and that's how to save money without feeling like your life has become miserable.
That balance is so important, because saving money sounds good in theory, but in real life, you still want to be comfortable.
Exactly. I don't think saving money should feel like punishment. It should feel like small, thoughtful choices that add up over time.
One of the biggest lessons I learned was that you should never assume the price you're paying is the best price you can get.
That's such an important mindset shift.
Companies usually don't offer discounts unless you ask, and asking feels uncomfortable at first, especially in English, but it's a skill worth practicing.
I remember the first time I called the service provider to negotiate. My heart was beating fast, and I had planned what I was going to say.
That planning is very real.
I told them I was thinking about switching because the price was too high for me, and I was surprised by how quickly they offered a lower rate.
That moment feels empowering.
It really does. You realize you're not helpless. You can have a conversation.
Another thing that helped me was paying attention to small habits, turning off lights, unplugging chargers, being more mindful.
Those things sound small, but over a year, they matter.
They do. And something else that helped me feel less stressed was budget billing.
That idea of paying the same amount every month can really bring peace of mind.
It removes the shock factor. No huge summer bill, no surprise winter spike.
And emotionally, that consistency helps people plan better and worry less.
I think that's the big takeaway today. Bills are not just numbers. They affect how we feel, how we plan, and how we talk to each other.
And being able to talk about them in English gives you more confidence and more control.
Before we say goodbye, we want to hear from you.
Yes, we'd love for you to leave a comment and tell us about one bill you find difficult to manage, or one small tip you use to save money.
You can start your comment with simple phrases like, "The most difficult bill for me is," or "One way I save money is." Don't worry about mistakes. The goal is to practice and express yourself.
We read your comments and we really enjoy learning about your experiences.
And if you found today's episode useful, please subscribe to Power English Speaking and give this episode a like.
Making sharing it with someone who's learning English can also make a big difference.
Thank you for spending this time with us and for practicing real, everyday English.
Keep learning, keep speaking, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Take care.
Goodbye.